ladies and gentlemen, Ross Perot.
I'm honored and privileged to be with all of you today, okay? Now, Admiral Robertson was on duty in the Pentagon, in charge of the National Command Center. He called I'm glad you're sitting down. Now I'm talking about a sergeant. He called a Marine general over in the Middle East, General Neal, and told him the story. General Neal went out on the street and found all 3 doctors, and they saved him. Now he's back at work in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, with a slight limp but just living a rich, full life. Then, about 6 months after all that happened, I had to speak for some reason, I don't know why they invited me, to the Fortune 500 business leaders at some big event they had at the United Nations. Present at that event was a Marine general, General Neal. He came up to me in front of all these big shots at the podium and started panging me, with his finger saying, blank, 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 Perot, you really fouled up my Sunday night a few months ago. And I said, General, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, well, I'm the poor blank, blank, blank the Pentagon called and sent me out on the street to find those doctors, and you didn't even know what branch of the service they were in. But the end of the story is, I tell you these stories because that's who you are. That's what you've done all through your career. And I think it's so important that we always keep it front and center in our nation. A very close friend of mine was Bill Leftwich at the Naval Academy. He came from a wealthy family in Memphis. While at the Naval Academy, he was a brigade commander. He had every honor and recognition. He had to earn it and on and on. When he went to Vietnam in his first tour, he didn't have to work, much less be a Marine. He went into Marine training, went straight to Vietnam, and received every medal but the Medal of Honor on his first tour. He was so highly respected when he came home, he was made aide to Secretary of the Navy, John Warner. At the end of his tour with John Warner, John said, Bill, where do you want to go? Bill said, back to Vietnam. Now, that's my kind of America. My wife and I were with Bill and his wife at the Waldorf Astoria the night he was leaving to fly back for a big dinner honoring Bob Hope. Bob Hope heard that Bill Leftwich was there. Now, isn't this interesting? He stopped everything, sent people all over the hotel looking for him, and his only interest was to spend some time with Bill before he left. Now, that says a lot about Bob Hope, and it says a lot about what Bill Leftwich had done. He went back over from the second tour. 6 months later, the Secretary of the Navy, John Warner, called me at 3 in the morning, crying openly, saying, Ross, we've lost Bill. He was in charge of a recon battalion. His policy, not Marine Corps policy, was that any time his men got in trouble, he personally rescued them. That says a lot about him, doesn't it? He didn't send a team out, he went out and got them. He just pulled a team out of trouble using a helicopter. They came out of the jungle, 1,200 feet in the air. The edge of the helicopter blade hit a cliff. The helicopter was fluttering to the earth, and Bill Leftwich, with no emotion at all in his voice, using the radio, called back to the command center and dictated a farewell message to his wife and his 2 sons. That tells you a lot about Bill Leftwich, too. Those are all, the only thing in his mind was to say goodbye. I was at his funeral in Memphis a few weeks later, and it broke my heart to see those 2 little boys standing there with great pride as they lost their dad. Well, one went to VMI, became a Marine, and reached the rank of Marine Colonel during his career. The other one went to the Naval Academy and became a pilot and reached command of Colonel. So the acorns did not fall very far from the old oak tree. Today, though, at Quantico, there is a Leftwich Memorial Trophy. It's issued every year by the Marine Corps to the outstanding officer in the Marine Corps, young officer in the Marine Corps, and that is one of the most highly sought-after awards in the Marine Corps. So again, I tell you these stories because in the civilian world where people don't do this, this is the gut part of your lives to recognize, reward, and take care of one another. And that is so important. And then I have to tell you about a guy who was 15 years old when he enlisted in World War II. His name was Dick Meadows. He came from West Virginia. His dad was a coal miner. He fought in World War II. He was so outstanding that they just kept on promoting him. He was the #2 commander on the Sante raid, led by Bull Simons, and by that point he was like Bull Simons' son. He was James Bond in real life in terms of what he could do. He was in Tehran by himself, alone, working out all the plans there to rescue the 52 hostages. Now that takes a lot of guts. You don't exactly blend in as a big, tall American wandering those streets. He did it. The night the raid failed, the helicopter crashed in the desert. Dick was there in Tehran by himself. There was no plan to evacuate him. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from the Pentagon. They said, they knew I was close to Dick. They wanted to make sure I knew that Dick's picture had been left in the helicopter in the desert, and that Dick was a wanted man, and that the government wasn't going to do anything to get him. But the wonderful thing is he also gave me a telephone number where he thought I might be able to call Dick halfway around the world, and not, the most advanced technology country in the world. Well, I called Dick and got him on the phone. I told him the story. Dick said, "Don't worry, Ross, I'll get out." Now, he just never finished high school, but he spoke German and had a German passport, which I didn't know. So he walked through the airport and got out and came home. Now, you've seen people like that do that. Probably many of you have done things that creative, but it was just wonderful. After he retired and worked in the Delta team in Special Forces. Did 3 tours in Iraq. This essay is how you conduct a rescue. All about how you do it. I'm just going to read you the last line of the essay. I know how to do this because my dad taught me. Can you Dick wrote me a note, which I have framed on the walls in my hallways in the office, all of that. And at the foot of it, he said, "Ross, it doesn't get better than this." And it certainly doesn't. These are the types of people that you are and that you are associated with from the military, but there are not a lot of people with these qualities. People like you allow us to keep the Star-Spangled Banner waving, and it's people like you that will allow it to wave privately in the 21st century. I'll tell you briefly another story of Jerry O'Malley. Went in the Air Force, one of the first instructors at the Air Force Academy when it was being started. He did Mission Impossible, flying U-2s, SR-71s all over in China and Russia for years. He could have been shot down on every flight. He had to feel that nothing could get him. Again and again, he would put his life on the line to do the reconnaissance and the intelligence gathering for our country. He went through all that and made it. All the great things he did made him one of the most respected officers in the Air Force. He was a 4-star general. He was on his way to being chairman of the Joint Chiefs. One night, he took his wife out to raise money for the Boy Scouts in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He lived in Washington, working at the Pentagon. In Scranton, there's a cliff at the end of the runway. His airplane lost one engine on takeoff, and we lost Jerry O'Malley and his wife. This is a man who stood at the guardian of the gate during the Cold War and took risks that few people have ever taken. If you spent 5 minutes with him, you would want to spend the rest of your life associated with him. And if you ever had to go into combat, you would certainly want him at your side. And I'll never forget when Colonel Simons was getting ready to rescue the people in Iran. He needed that rescue help. He later participated in the rescue of our people in Iran. He needed some documents. And Jerry O'Malley furnished him all those documents, but he said, "Now, Perot, I'd lose my job if people knew about it, so I'm just going to leave them at a door near the Pentagon. You pick them up and get them back to Bull Simons." Did all that. He got the documents. That tells you a lot about him, right? And another favorite of mine is General Wayne Downing, 4-star general, commanded Special Forces, a role model of what all of us should be. He's now passed away, but he did heroic things during his life. As China was taking over Hong Kong, a large number of Hmong Vietnamese who fought bravely alongside our special forces and did incredible things to protect them and save their lives during the war were at risk. They had to flee to an island off Hong Kong. As Hong Kong was being taken over to China, China made a deal with Vietnam to send the Hmongs back to Vietnam, and the odds were about 100% they were going to execute them. The word went out. How'd you hear about this, Perot? Suddenly I got a call from Ulysses Presley, and I thought Elvis had been reborn. He told me the whole story. I called General Shelton, who was in charge of Special Forces then at the Pentagon. He knew exactly who Presley was. He was a highly decorated Special Forces story. He knew all about this, and he said, Ross, the only reason I'm alive today is because of these Hmongs. We've got to get them out. He says, what is the problem? I replied, they have to be validated according to the State Department before they would let them come in. He said, whatever it takes, we've got to get them out. Well, that got my attention. I then called retired General Wayne Downing, that's probably another name you remember, to get his advice. He wasn't there, but his wife gave me a 10-minute lecture on how many times the Hmongs had saved Wayne, and told me that Wayne was in a hotel in Washington and I could call him there. Okay. I called him there, got him on the phone, and explained that the challenge was to validate these people so that the State Department and Immigration would let them come to the U.S. He said, Pro, I can do that, I'll be on the next plane. And I said, where do you want me to send the ticket? He said, nobody buys this ticket for me but me, Perot. I wouldn't be alive without him if it weren't for the young. None. He was not a rich man, but this was in his heart, it was in his soul. It's what the military is all about and what a leader is all about. I said, can I help you with anything? He says, yeah, I need an interpreter. Guess who I called? Nguyen Quoc Dot. Now, he had every reason in the world not to go because he'd be a dead man if they ever got their hands on him. He went on the next plane. They got to Hong Kong on Monday. They called me on Tuesday. General Downing said, Perot, the Chinese won't let us on the island, but don't worry, we'll get on the island, we'll validate them, and we'll call you when it's done. I didn't hear anything until Saturday. They called and said, Perot, it's all taken care of, the men are all on their way back to the U.S., and I said, just out of curiosity, how did you do this? How did you get on the island? How did you get them to release them? I'll never forget the conversation. Wayne Downing said, don't ask, Perot, laughed and hung up. I still don't know how they did it. During the first Gulf War, I was covered up by soldiers who didn't have armor for vehicles, flak jackets, and the most fundamental things you need to fight, and I couldn't get over it. It took a while to get the Pentagon. Well, the Pentagon had problems getting everything put together with the White. They don't do anything until the White House approves it. But fortunately, they got resolved pretty quickly. During the first Gulf War, over 100,000 soldiers were wounded by chemical agents that were blown up when our soldiers were ordered to blow up the bunkers that contained ammunition that we had given Saddam Hussein before the war started. They didn't know that there were chemical and biological weapons there. And 13 months later, after the war, I had a group of Special Forces senior soldiers, they're all military officers in special operations, came to my office. They looked like people coming out of Dachau at the end of World War II. They brought pictures of their children born and conceived and born after the war. One eye here in the center, arms stopping halfway down between the elbows and the wrist, on and on and on and on, shreds of fingers. And it was pretty obvious something terrible had happened. I got the top medical school in the United States, has more Nobel Prize recipients than any other medical school, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting enough, it was started in a Quonset hut after World War II. So they've come a long way, right? But to make a long story short, they got right into it. And the Clinton administration didn't want anybody doing this. They came down, told them, if you don't stop this research, we will stop. If you don't stop this research, we will stop all federally funded research. And the president of the medical school said, as a matter of principle, we can't do this. These men were wounded. Great Britain had 25,000 men wounded. They jumped right on and worked right away. We all kept working on it, and to make a long story short, they've made very, very strong programs now that are in place to protect our men from that should it occur in the future. But as far as giving treatment and recovery, that was almost impossible.